infrastructure as code in AWS. Yes, that's what we're talking about, the business use case for it, why do businesses want to do it, why do they have to think about CloudFormation template, the security best practice, and also a walkthrough of how you would create a CloudFormation template, a simple one, not too hard, which you should be able to deploy using the GitHub repository that I'll share over here. Now, if you know all these things about CloudFormation, the basic and foundation, definitely use the timeline at the bottom to go straight to the security best practice so you can find out what needs to be done, or go straight to the walkthrough where you can see how that's done as well. But for everyone else, follow along and we'll get the video started. The first thing I want to start with is infrastructure as code definition. For people who may not be aware of infrastructure as code in general, infrastructure is the server or the workstation where your application will be running. And infrastructure as code basically means that unlike traditional environments where infrastructure had to be manually created, you had to go to a physical data center, infrastructure as code is the ability to use code to create the same infrastructure of workstation servers automatically in a cloud context. Now, this was not possible before cloud made it possible. So public cloud services like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they all made the whole world of infrastructure as code possible for everyone to use. And that's why it got popular. And that's why it's important to know what infrastructure as code is before we go into CloudFormation templates. The other thing you want to know is source code repository. Because I mentioned infrastructure as code is basically a code, and source code repository is where you save the code which would be used as infrastructure as code. Now that you know what infrastructure as code is, as well as what a source code repository is, you probably want to know what is the example of a infrastructure as code service that you can use. Now, if you were just talking about AWS, you can only use AWS CloudFormation or AWS CDK, which is basically another way of creating CloudFormation. However, there are other options like there are Terraform, Ansible, and a lot more options that you can use to create a infrastructure as code for the infrastructure that you're trying to create. Now, as far as source code repository goes, the most popular ones on the internet are GitLab, GitHub, Atlassian, Bitbucket if you want to use them, but AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they have their own version as well, but which you may choose to use if you want to. But it's good to know that some of the more common use cases would be around GitHub and GitLab and Bitbucket. As I mentioned in the beginning, traditional environments require you to create infrastructure like workstations and servers manually and takes a long time. Now, because we have infrastructure as code, that means you can deploy your features faster. As a business, your use case for using infrastructure as code would be you want to be able to deploy an application and build the infrastructure for that application in a way that you can deploy features consistently without worrying about taking hours for the infrastructure to be built, which is basically called out over here. And in this video, we'll also do a walkthrough of the example themselves in a bit later, but it's important for you to know why someone would want to go down the path of using infrastructure as code. Before I go to the next business use case, I want to clarify for people who may not know what AWS S3 is. It is basically a storage service. For people who know what Dropbox is or Google Drive is, imagine the same, but for AWS. That makes sense. So this is like the Dropbox or Google Drive equivalent provided by AWS, and you can only use it with AWS. Same thing with Dropbox. If you have a Dropbox account, you can use Dropbox wherever, but if you don't have a Dropbox account, it gets a bit more difficult. But I'm not going to go into it, that's too complicated. But for understanding the second use case, you need to know about what AWS S3 bucket is. For the second business use case, I've kind of called out that my application is going to be deployed into an AWS S3 bucket, hence the reason for explaining what AWS S3 bucket is. The second business use case, which is kind of the security angle, you need to introduce security checkpoints onto the CloudFormation template. This can be done in many ways, and we'll go through it as part of the walkthrough as well. Typically, you would have a source code repository like GitHub or GitLab. You would download the code onto your laptop and then use that and your credentials from AWS to trigger the CloudFormation template, which would in turn build the infrastructure. Now, you can definitely go a lot more advanced in this, where you don't even have to copy it to your laptop. You can make it in such a way that it's triggered the moment you commit the new code into your GitHub. It gets automatically actioned on the other end in AWS. You can go down that part as well. But for the simple use case, because we obviously want to learn with a simple use case first and not complicated, we're going to try down the path of using a simple use case first. So in this scenario, we're going to build a simple architecture where we'll have an AWS S3 bucket, which we're going to create using CloudFormation template. And we would have our source code repository on our laptop itself. So I'm not going to complicate that at all. I would leave a GitHub link to the simple example that I'm talking about from a CloudFormation template, which you can use. For this, you would require yourself to have at least an AWS free account. You should also have a IAM user configured on your local terminal. Now, if you don't know how to do any of these, definitely leave a comment at the bottom and I will create a video for that on how to do these. Hopefully this is valuable, and let's get into the walkthrough for how to create an AWS S3 using a CloudFormation template. Welcome to the walkthrough. And so begin with, I hope you have logged into your Amazon account, and we are going to do a simple use case for CloudFormation. We're just going to use an AWS CloudFormation to create an S3 bucket. Now you would need an S3 bucket, obviously. So to create this, let's go to the AWS CLi first. Okay, so I've got my git clone ready to go, but before obviously you're wondering where I got the git clone command from. So if you head to cloudsecuritybootcamp.com, that's cloudsecuritybootcamp, and if you click on GitHub, this will take you to the GitHub repository that we've been maintaining for the Cloud Security Bootcamp. You can see this over here, simple AWS S3. If you just go into it, feel free to start this if you like, so that you can always come back to it if you want to. I have got a README that explains all the commands that need to be done. Make sure you replace the right names over there. The way this would work is we run each CloudFormation template is basically upping the game of everything that we go through from a business use case perspective. Like the first one is literally just a command template to create an AWS S3 bucket. That's fine, only 17 lines. We just tell the name of what our bucket needs to be. Second one ensures that we can only upload encrypted items or objects onto the S3 bucket, and we also make sure that the encryption is enabled by default, even though these days it's enabled by default, but it's an extra assurance. Third file is basically enabling versioning. Now, for people who don't know what versioning is just keeping sure that in case you were to lose the object, there is a previous version. It's like a backup. Actually, probably the easiest way to explain it, it's a backup. And last but not least, we are going to talk about how can you see the output on the screen. Once we have done all of this, we will basically go on to the final stage and delete the stack. I'm going to go into git clone. That's my URL. I copied it. I already copied it, but you can see it over here. Once you do that, you should see a folder called simple. If I do that, yeah, sweet. So all my files are over here, and I should be able to just run them from here as well. So let's try and run them one by one. Ignore the deployment script. That's the one that I just created locally, which you would not see on this end. That's just for me to make sure that I can run these commands without failing, and I've tested them before. All right, let's start with the first one. So the first command that I'm going to run is AWS CloudFormation template. I'm going to create a stack, and I'm going to call the stack name as test stack, and that's my first file, which you would have also seen already. And then my S3 bucket name. Now 853, one thing you have to be wary of is the bucket name should be unique in the entire Amazon. So if, say for example, if 100 people watch this video, and if you end up creating the same bucket name as test Ashish bucket 853, it would fail after I create this, and if it's still active, because it just only wants every bucket to be unique around the world. So the way I do it is like, if I know I just like that name, so I'm going to use that. After that, I would add a time into it. So essentially, it's 8:53 right now. So I'll just put 853, and I'm just going to go hit enter. All right, that basically is my stack ID that would be created. And at this point in time, I can hit Q. If I come back to my console, and if I search for CloudFormation template, so I can type in CloudFormation. And once it loads up, you can see it's already running. That's my test stack that I called out earlier. If you click on that, you can use the events. That's the one. If you come into events, you can see this progressing. And if you just keep refreshing, you'll see, oh, there you go, that my resource has been created. Now, resource is a great hint for, let's click on this. There you go, my S3 bucket is created. Now, this was the first use case, right, where we had to create in the North Virginia region. I had to create an S3 bucket with that name. Now, that's that part done. Let's get to the second part, which is, if I go back to my repository, the second part is about how do I ensure only encrypted resources are coming in. So I'm going to go in here. I've got my script ready. So I'm going to go to my second command. Okay, so I've got the only difference you would find is there's deploy. I've got the file name from there. I've got the bucket name, which matches the previous bucket name. All right, let's see what happens. So change set is being created. And what this means is if I come back to CloudFormation, and if I do a refresh here, not over here, let me close that. If I do a refresh here, oh, there you go, it's updating. So now to see this, if I go over to stack again, I click on this and I see events. Look at that, you can see it's updating the bucket. And my bucket at the moment has versioning as disabled. and nothing here, and no permissions at the moment. So there's no bucket policy. It does not allow for any public access. So my hope is at the end of this, once this is finished, there you go. So update is complete. If I come here, remember how this bucket policy is empty. So if I refresh this, there you go. So this is basically saying this is my bucket name. And unless everything is, if there is no AES 256 encryption, you can't put an object. So this is the first security use case that we did by ensuring that only encrypted objects can be uploaded onto it. Now, the next one, this is the bucket versioning one, which is our third use case. Yeah, third use case over here. The reason you would go for versioning is because in case someone was to accidentally delete a version of the S3 bucket, there is a backup copy. So versioning just literally just means backup copy. So hit enter. As long as this comes up, that means something is going on the CLI side. So if I come over here, do a refresh, look at that. It's doing an update in progress as well. Now, this particular step should not take that long, but just AWS being AWS sometimes, it still takes a couple of minutes. But just to show you the example, it says disabled. And as soon as this would finish, that should say enabled. Now, another thing to note over here is that if this is disabled, it's easy to delete the bucket. But if it was set to enabled, which should happen in a couple of minutes, there you go, it's enabled now. Now, if I was to try and delete this, I would not be able to delete it because if it would say, hey, versioning is enabled, you need to disable versioning first. And we'll also notice our CloudFormation template should finish completely. 3 for 3 so far, so I'm doing really well. All right, let's go for the fourth one, which was the output. Now, the reason I need the output is because if you look at over here, if I say, for example, I've never worked on this, I come out over here, I see a test tag. Okay, demonstrate the creation of S3 bucket, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that sounds very standard. I go in here, but I'm like, what? There is no output. So you want to be able to put output because everything, just by having this resource, I have to click on this button, go into this new S3 bucket and get all my resources over here. Like for example, over here, I would find out that, okay, so if I go into what would be my domain over here. So if I get that, that's my ARN. Now I can copy this and do the whole thing that I need to, or to make it easier, I can just bring that as an output over here. So the moment my template completes, I can maybe use it for another nested CloudFormation template, or I can just copy it directly from here for another purpose if I want to. So let's do that quickly. All right, so I've got that. And as you notice, I don't have any parameters because I'm just up with the file name, because I don't need to change any parameters. Not sure what happened there, so I'm just going to quickly do a quick change and come back over here. All right, that's more like it. So it's updating. If I come back onto my events, I should see there's another update in progress. And this time, again, one would imagine this should just happen quickly, and it did. Look at that. Now I've got outputs as well. So this is a very regular business use case where in a real life situation, especially if you are working on creating a website, which is hosted on S3 bucket, or you just want people to have access to an S3 bucket to store files, or whatever the scenario may be, this is a very real use case for what you would see in different jobs that you might do as a cloud engineer or a cloud security engineer. All right, now since we've done this, we probably want to clean up after this. So if I go back here, as I mentioned earlier, I have to disable the versioning first, and then I have to delete the stack. So there is a command for that. The only difference you'll find is I've changed it to suspended instead of enabled. So let's do this again quickly. In my scenario, I'm just going to go up and, that's the one. So I'm just going to quickly go to this. Suspended is going to be difficult to type, but no, let's make it work. That should work in a second. Now, waiting for update. You should remember this is at the moment set to enabled. And in a second, it should change to disabled. All right, suspended. Perfect. Now I'm in a state that I can go back over here and I can run the delete stack command, which should delete my entire CloudFormation template. Just waiting for it to finish. If it has already, I just need to wait for it to finish. Give me 1 minute. All right, so it's finished now. I'm going to copy the delete stack command. As you can see, it's delete stack. I don't have to put any parameter. Now, in case you're wondering why I keep calling it stack, that's just a terminology from CloudFormation templates. If you look at over here, they call it stack. There's also something called stack sets. We can have multiple sets of stack, but that's for another cloud security bootcamp lesson. If you want me to make a video on that, definitely let me know in the comment as well. But for now, let's delete the S3 bucket, and sweet, that's gone. This should still take a couple of minutes to delete, even though it's finished over there. You know how I was on this tab and I was trying to see this? If I do a refresh over here, there you go. It deleted the bucket. Sweet. So that pretty much was the update. And if I come back over here, if I close this, if I come to stack, and if I refresh this, there you go. Clean instance, clean reset count. So again, it was on Cloud Security Bootcamp. If you just go to the GitHub page, you should be able to just go straight to the URL. And yeah, I think I'll leave the link in the description as well. But that's pretty much what I wanted to show you as a walkthrough. As I mentioned, this can be even more advanced. You can use this using Terraform or other forms of IAC languages. If you want me to do a video on that, definitely leave that as a comment as well. Now let's continue with the video. All right, now that we have built an AWS S3 bucket using CloudFormation template, you probably also should be aware that there are more popular languages like Terraform as well as Ansible that are on the internet that have been used before CloudFormation template. So some of the jobs you apply for may also already have that kind of option available. So if you want me to make a video on how to do this exact thing on a Terraform video or a Bitbucket or GitLab, any of the scenario that you think you would want me to make a video on this for, definitely leave that as a comment and I would be happy to make that video as well. Now we are in the fun part of the video where we talk about the security best practices for AWS CloudFormation template, both the Amazon side as well as the client side. Because it's shared responsibility, we as customers or AWS also have some responsibility, but also because it's a service from AWS, they have some responsibility as well. Let's go into some of them. Let's talk about the Amazon side of responsibility first. They're responsible for making sure CloudFormation as a service is available for you whenever you need it. But because we're using the service on Amazon, we have some responsibility as well. They may choose to not have it compliant to all the standards you may need. They may choose to not have it in a region that you would want it to use on. So you should only work with services and the regions that you are allowed to work as per compliance standards. Now, you can obviously use AWS organization SCPs to control who can access CloudFormation template in which region and whether they can take action on there or not. You could also use the auditing service called AWS CloudTrail, which would allow you to monitor the kind of CloudFormation template requests being made by a particular user. And in addition to that, there's other services like Audit Manager, IAM Access Analyzer, and a lot more services provided by Amazon to make sure the things around the CloudFormation template are also being protected. They're obviously responsible for making sure the workstation or the server on their end, which is running the CloudFormation, is secure, but there is some responsibility on our side to make sure we maintain the compliance standards as well and use services provided by Amazon to monitor these effectively. Let's talk about the client side, people like you and I who are going to use the service. We obviously want to make sure that we are linting. By linting, what I mean is you want to make sure you don't have any secrets hard-coded in your CloudFormation template. You want to make sure that there are no more formatting mistakes or things which may basically break the code, especially when you have been writing it and all you're doing is just updating the CloudFormation template. Another important one is just the access. I would keep repeating identity is the new perimeter, as I've been calling out in the entire free Cloud Bootcamp so far. Even though this is technically the last episode for the bootcamp, I definitely wanted to call out again that please make sure you can remember that identity is more important. So identity would be required for you to control who can or cannot access CloudFormation template. You especially don't want people to be able to change CloudFormation template in production or delete them in production. So that's definitely a very important thing you need to look for. Now, I've been explaining the security responsibility of clients for any AWS service in three ways. First one being security of the CloudFormation template itself. That would be your IAM access, configuration access, who can access, whether you're able to change it, a S3 bucket to public access, whatever the scenario may be. How would you protect the CloudFormation template itself? The second one, the content inside the CloudFormation template, which is where the linting comes in, secret manager comes in. You're also using secure coding best practices because you are able to include bash script in some of the CloudFormation template you can use. Basically, you can configure it in a way that you create an application, and as part of that application being built, you can say, hey, can you run these 3 commands on a bash script perspective as well? Now, again, if any of these terms or any of these examples don't make sense, and you want me to make a video on the whole CloudFormation template, a bit more advanced level on how you can actually have some bash script to maybe, I don't know, install Apache website as you deploy the server. So the moment the server comes up, it's already running a website. We can do all that and a lot more. Definitely leave that as a comment so I can just make that video for you as well. You probably also want to make sure that the code that you're deploying, if it's a Lambda function, which may have a package by itself, or you may be downloading from a repository, which would be on the internet, however many links you have, which are external, or however many information that you have as an input, definitely make sure you're validating them to be the right one. And you're only linking to sources that you trust, especially in production. The last one that I want to talk about is the CloudFormation private entry points. For example, you can also have private links for your CloudFormation template. That's right. You don't have to always go to the internet. Oh, I probably should have mentioned this earlier. CloudFormation template requires you to be on the internet talking to the Amazon network, which is on the internet, if that makes sense, but on the Amazon internet. So what if you are an organization that you are on premise, you have a data center and you have your employees that want to use CloudFormation, but you don't want them to go to the internet? What you do is you create something called the VPC private link, which allows you to link a CloudFormation template onto a VPC endpoint, which you can use to just privately access CloudFormation templates. Last but not least, you need to deploy processes such that if there is a change to the existing CloudFormation template, or if there's a drift, you are able to pick that up quickly and action on it, because you don't want, especially if it's a production account, you definitely don't want anything wrong happening to it as well. So need to be wary of that. That's pretty much what I wanted to cover from the video. Now you should be able to go and create at least a basic application using AWS CloudFormation template and still be able to secure the resource that you're creating with as well. Now there could be a lot more complicated example. If you want me to go a level more, may add more business use case, or make more CloudFormation template tutorials, definitely leave that as a comment, because we talk about cloud security every day, all day on this channel. And it's people like you who make us successful. So anything we can do to help you progress your cloud security career, definitely reach out. If you can help us out with that, that would be pretty awesome as well. All right, that's pretty much what I had for the video. If you enjoyed this video, definitely consider liking and subscribing. I will see you in the next video. Peace.